When we left California in 2011 to teach English in China, we had no idea that we were at the beginning of an adventure that we're still living today.
Since then, we've lived in over 30 countries in Asia, Europe, and South America.
We're so privileged to hold American passports, which allow us to travel so freely.
That said, after 12 years outside of the U.S., we have a much different perspective on our home country, and we have the feeling that we're not alone.
Experiencing life outside the U.S. has broadened our horizons to other ways of living, and we've realized that the U.S. way of life is not the best one, at least not for us.
We've put a lot of thought into why we don't think we'll ever move back to the U.S., and here are 10 reasons why. Number 1, the cost of living.
The U.S. is one of the most expensive places to live in the world, even more than most European countries. The first reason for that is rent. In 2011, when Steve and I wanted to move into a studio apartment together near our hometown, it was going to be $1,400 per month. And we just looked up the cost of that studio now, and it's over $2,000 a month. That's a 40% increase in only 12 years, and wages have definitely not increased by 40% in that time.
And that $2,000 doesn't even include things like utilities or phone and internet. And the phone and internet infrastructure in the United States is very poor and very expensive compared to the rest of the world.
In all of our travels and living abroad, we've spent an average of $500 to $600 a month on rent, much lower in some places. I think the lowest we ever spent on rent was $300 a month in Cambodia, and that was for a 3-bedroom apartment. We spent less than $400 to live on the Albanian coast in Saranda. We spent $600 to live in an incredible serviced apartment in downtown Bangkok.
The most we've ever spent on rent is $900 a month, and that was for a 2-bedroom apartment in the capital city of Bucharest in Romania.
We could provide even more examples, but I think you get the idea. Rent in the U.S. is so much higher than most places in the rest of the world.
Number 2 is transportation. The U.S. is a very car-centric country. You need a car to do anything. If you want to go out to eat, if you want to get groceries, everything requires you to get in a car and drive somewhere to accomplish anything you want to do.
And that was by design. The U.S. was created for cars in the urban planning and the way it's laid out. And having a car can be very costly. You have car payments, car maintenance, car insurance, gas. There are all these expenses that come along with having a car that really add up. And we've just saved a ton of money not needing to have a car outside of America.
And because we grew up in that culture, we always thought we would always need a car. We would think about what car we would have when we were older. And having been abroad for 12 years, we've never had a car.
Yeah, there's been a few instances where we've rented a car to go on road trips or things like that, but otherwise, we really haven't needed a car in these 12 years abroad because public transportation and other modes of transportation are so accessible outside of the U.S.
Everywhere else we've been in the world has had easy, cheap, accessible public transport. Things like trains, trams, tuk-tuks, taxis, buses, subways. Speaking of saving money, number 3, healthcare. American health insurance costs you hundreds of dollars a month, and then that does not even cover you if you get sick because you have to pay off your deductible before your insurance will even kick in.
And a deductible is usually thousands of dollars. So you're already thousands of dollars in the hole before your insurance even starts to help you pay for your medical care. In a lot of cases, Americans delay getting the health care that they need out of fear of what it's going to cost them. Often, if you go into the ER or into the doctor, you don't have any idea what a treatment is going to cost you, which is kind of crazy because in most places in the world, they tell you straight up what it's going to cost you when you go in. And for Americans, that's a horrible surprise. Most times it costs thousands of dollars for any type of treatment.
For Americans, healthcare looms over them like a dark cloud because an accident can ruin your life.
There are so many examples of this online. You've probably read some of them before.
Or maybe even experienced some. And if you're lucky, your job provides health insurance, but then your health insurance is tied to your job, and that is another aspect that will just keep you working in a job for fear of losing that health insurance.
We currently pay $90 a month for our health insurance with Safety Wing. That covers us for major emergencies and accidents if something big happens. Safety Wing insurance covers us for pretty much every country in the world aside from North Korea, Syria, Iran, and you guessed it, the US. For anything preventative, we are happy to pay out of pocket, and we've been doing that for years.
When we were in Bangkok, Thailand, I was able to get a full medical checkup from tip to taint, and then I was able to actually talk to a doctor. The whole process took about 6 hours, and it only cost $250. And apparently, I'm never going to die.
And I actually had surgery while we were abroad, also in Bangkok, Thailand. And I felt like I was in a five-star hotel. The facility was so beautiful, and I had such amazing care there. And it cost a fraction of what it would have cost back in the US.
It's actually pretty difficult for us to get insurance for the U.S. whenever we want to go home to visit family, and it truly has prevented us from going back as often as we'd like.
If you're an American and you're living the kind of lifestyle we are and you go home frequently to visit family, please let us know in the comments what kind of insurance you use because we actually could use help with this.
And that leads us into point number 4, job security. The U.S. has very few worker protections. Most Americans are working as at-will employees, which essentially means you can be fired at any time for any reason.
That actually happened to me at my first job out of college. I was working for one of the largest insurance companies in the US, and I was the top salesperson in our office. And Steve and I were planning to move to China, and so I decided that I would let my boss know that so I would have adequate time to train a new person because I did want to do right by him. So I let him know that we'd be leaving in 5 months, and instead of being grateful that I had done that, he fired me on the spot. It was pretty crazy to me that I tried to do the right thing and then I was punished for it. In the end, it was just an important lesson that your job is not looking out for you in the US and you need to take care of yourself first.
But because of this at-will employment, Americans are afraid to not do extra work for no money because they are terrified of getting fired and losing everything. If you lose your job, you lose your health insurance, which now you have to pay for, so you can't afford your car, you can't afford your rent. The dominoes fall, and you end up doing mouth stuff for soup money. Another thing we've noticed every time we go home is this increased expectation of how much you're supposed to tip. Tipping is not a thing outside of America.
No, not in most countries. Maybe if you have really good service, you'll leave a couple of coins or leave 10%. But in the US, it's actually basically required that you tip at least 20% because servers are depending on those wages.
Business owners in the U.S. get away with this because of the federal minimum wage for tipped workers, which can be as low as $2.13 an hour.
So if you don't tip those workers, they are not going to be making anywhere close to a living wage. The federal minimum wage in the US is $7.25 per hour. That actually varies from state to state. So in California, the minimum wage is $15 an hour. But even so, if you're working a minimum wage job, even full time, it's still very hard to survive in the US.
Another thing American workers typically don't have is maternity or paternity leave.
And in most cases, they're unpaid, which means that the parents will need to go back to work fairly soon after having the baby. Childcare is also extremely expensive, so in a lot of cases, women will leave the workforce because financially it just makes more sense. And in many countries, childcare is actually subsidized by the government. The US claims to be all about families, but there are very few things in place to actually help families out.
This one is related to healthcare. Number 5, food. Americans, by and large, suffer from a variety of health problems, and a lot of that is related to the American diet. When we go to visit American supermarkets, we are overwhelmed by the sheer variety of everything on the shelves, and then we are shocked with how unhealthy so many of those options are. Everything in America is bigger, so it needs to last longer, and so those shelf-stable products are full of preservatives, and then they're coating that weird chemical flavor with just a ton of sugar.
We also noticed that it costs a lot to eat healthy in the US. So to buy fresh produce or organic food is pretty costly and kind of prevents a lot of Americans from even being able to afford to eat healthy food.
America is covered in places called food deserts. Google it. It's terrifying.
Food deserts are basically parts of the country where people don't have any access to healthy, fresh foods. In the US, you almost always have to drive to go to a grocery store, so you're probably not going to go very regularly if you can avoid it. So because people buy so much food in larger quantities, there ends up being a lot more food waste in the US, which is just a side effect of the way that the culture is laid out. That's just not the case in most other places in the world. It's really common to have produce stands just on street corners like every block in a lot of countries that we visited. Places like Bulgaria, Romania, Albania. Those Balkan countries seem to have a plethora of fresh fruit and vegetables everywhere you go. And by nature, oftentimes it is organic because they aren't using harmful chemicals. It's just not the way that they do things in a lot of those places.
And it is very inexpensive because that is how everybody eats every day. There are daily vegetable and fruit markets because people buy their fruits and vegetables on the daily.
You don't have to wait for a Saturday farmer's market and drive 2 towns over to get to it. You can just find fresh fruits and vegetables everywhere you go. So we find that we just naturally eat a lot healthier when we're outside of the US. We bought all of these vegetables and fruits here in Peru a couple days ago at the local market for under $7.
We also tend to eat out at restaurants more often because it's just more affordable. There's not an extra 20% added on top of the bill at the end for the tip.
On our most recent trip home to California, we went to one of our favorite burrito places and we decided just to split a breakfast burrito because it was $15 for one burrito and we couldn't stomach buying two burritos at that price.
We did get guac.
I mean, yeah, it was with guac, but $15 is still pretty steep. Especially when you compare it to other countries. Right now we're in Peru and we went out to dinner a couple nights ago and we paid $5 for a 2-course meal. We each got soup and a main dish with chicken, and it also included unlimited fresh fruit juice.
The $5 total.
Yeah, for both of us.
Number 6, gun violence. This one is truly upsetting. Really an unbelievable thing that is happening every single day. I mean, fear is now part of being in America. Fear of losing your job, fear of losing your health care, and now, because of the ubiquity of guns, fear of every public space.
We feel it whenever we go home. We kind of find ourselves checking the exits, seeing what our easiest escape route is if someone does enter the place with a gun and start shooting up. And at this point in the US, it's like a 6 degrees of separation if you know someone who's been around or in a mass shooting. Both of our brothers have been within a 1-mile radius of when a mass shooting was happening. And Steve-O's brother's friend actually got shot during a mass shooting.
He's okay, but still, what a horrible thing to have to say.
It's truly terrifying that you can't just live your life in the US without the fear of something like that going on, because it could happen anywhere at any time, and I think that's what makes it so scary.
The rest of the world jokes that Americans are always very friendly, always saying hi and smiling at everyone that they see. And that's true, Americans are very friendly, but that's not out of the kindness of their hearts. Americans are friendly to everyone because you don't know who has a gun.
Gun violence is not normal, it's not okay, and the majority of Americans feel that way and want something to be done with regulations, yet nothing is being done about it.
Nothing. And without getting too political here, number 7, politics is a scam. Everything has been politicized, everything is woke and some part of nonsensical culture war, and it's all a distraction. The culture war is a distraction from the true issue at the core of American politics. Thanks to Citizens United, rich people can spend unlimited money on political campaigns to get the people they want elected to write the laws that the rich people want and not for the actual voters. The things that are going on in America right now are a distraction from that true point. So people are concerned whether gay people can have cake at their wedding, and rather that billionaires are not paying their fair share of taxes. Discussions around politics with friends and family has become toxic to the point of irrelevance.
Everyone is just regurgitating talking points that they heard on the news or that they read in the newspaper, but no one is really talking about the real issues that are going on. They're just kind of talking about the issues of the day, and it gets really exhausting.
We still vote in every election, midterms and local, because that's the one power that hasn't been taken away yet.
And we have to vote by fax for our district, which is always such a pain in the ass.
And we pay our taxes, both state and federal, every year because we're not rich enough to not have to.
And as Americans, you need to pay your taxes no matter how long you've lived abroad. You always need to pay at least federal taxes, which is just not the case in a lot of countries, which is kind of upsetting to learn.
Number 8, consumer culture and the hustle mindset.
We've noticed that whenever we're back in the US, we end up spending a lot more money than what we spend abroad. And that's because there just are so many things to spend your money on.
And the US is really good at advertising. They've convinced people it's a good place to live.
Speaking of advertising, there are billboards and commercials and ads on the radio and just advertising everywhere you look in the States. So it makes it really easy for you to think that you need all of these things.
The advertising in question is usually not showing you how great the product is, it's showing you how terrible your life is without that product.
It's just really easy to accumulate a lot of stuff in America because you constantly feel like you need to buy more and more and more to make your life better, to solve whatever problem that the advertising is making you think that you have. When in reality, you can live with very little. And we know this because we do normally live with very little. and we're very happy living that way. But when we go back to the States, we just end up buying a lot more.
All of our worldly possessions weigh around 100 pounds.
Yeah, and we're happy that way. We don't like having a lot of stuff, but we can totally see how people get wrapped up in buying a lot when you're in that environment in the US. There's almost even a pressure to buy more because you want to fit in with your peers or have what they have or keep up with the Joneses. And that has been the case in the US for a really long time. People trying to keep up with like the latest car, having a nice house, upgrading constantly. There's just this feeling that you need to do that in the States. Money and proving that you have wealth feels like a really important thing in the States.
In the US, even drugs are advertised. When we're watching TV with our parents, every single ad break features a drug ad.
And they're so weird. It's like a list of 100 side effects, and half the time you don't even know what the problem the drug is supposed to be treating is. But they tell you need to talk to your doctor and get this drug.
And it's really weird because it's people like pretending to have a birthday party while a voice from God says how this drug could and will kill you. This practice is illegal in every single country across the world except the US and New Zealand. Commercials should not be giving medical advice. Doctors and people that went to medical school should be telling you what drugs are good for you. You should be making those decisions with a doctor and not from the ad break during Jeopardy.
Consumerism is just a really normal part of American life. In 2015, Steve and I had just finished up 4 years living abroad in Asia and lots of travel, and we decided that we would try to move home to California and actually move up to LA. We'd been out of the game for so long at that point that when we moved back, we felt like we had massively screwed up our lives somehow because we couldn't easily fit back into the American way of life.
We thought we had completely ruined our lives and we weren't where we were supposed to be, as prescribed by everyone else around us. And we just listened to what everyone, all of these Americans telling us what we should be doing instead of listening to ourselves. And after a couple months of realizing that maybe not everyone else knew what they were talking about, we decided between the two of us to move to Southeast Asia. And that's the best choice we've ever made.
I really agree. I'm so glad that we listened to ourselves and we knew that the States was not the right place for us, and we got out of there.
And that leads us to number 9, priorities. Our perspective, having lived in so many different cultures around the world, has led us to believe that Americans have really messed up priorities. Americans like to brag how much they work and talk about how many hours they put in their job, and I just hear someone who is very terrible at time management.
I mean, being busy is seen as a badge of honor in a lot of cases. Some people have acknowledged this and are working on it and setting boundaries. But as we mentioned before, your job kind of is the most important thing to you because you need it to stay alive and afford all the things that
come with being American.
And in the rest of the world, that's simply not the case. There is more of a work-life balance that we've noticed in a lot of cultures where family and friends are more important than your work. And we just notice people out and about enjoying life more on a daily basis. In other countries, people going for evening walks after dinner or spending time in the central plazas in town with their friends, going out to eat because it's not too expensive to afford to do it for normal people. In the States, it feels like people are trying to monetize everything, even their hobbies. You can't just do something for enjoyment anymore. There has to be some angle where you can make money off of it. We also find it harder to make friends in the US, and we've tried to figure out why that is. One of the reasons we think is that people already have their own friend group and they aren't looking to make more friends. Everyone's already so busy that they don't have time to meet new people. Another thing is that when you meet people, it kind of feels transactional, like, what do you do for work? Are we on the same level? There's just this kind of different vibe than what we find abroad. That might not always be the case, but in our experience, we've just had a harder time making friends in the States compared to in other countries when we're traveling. We find it easier to meet our neighbors. We make friends more easily with other foreigners from different countries, maybe because we have this same kind of desire to travel and see the world, so we have that in common already when we meet them. But it just feels so much easier to meet people when we're outside of the US.
One of the things we've seen happen, having lived outside of America, it's very hard for us to relate to Americans and Americans to relate to us because we're living such divergent lifestyles. Mm-hmm. When we try to tell people about our travels, we can actively watch their eyes glaze over because they have no frame of reference for what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, people are very nice and they're like, cool, but it's just so different from the lifestyle that Americans are leading that it can be hard for us to connect with people. And I think that's a big part of it. A lot of people who've lived abroad experience this. And that's why I think it's easier to connect with people who are living the same kind of lifestyle that we're living. Conversations that we have in the US also feel a bit more superficial, talking a lot about TV shows or things that people have bought recently. And I think part of that is people don't want to get too deep into issues that would cause kind of fighting or get into politics. So people just keep it on a surface level, but it makes it harder to get to know people.
Number 10, Edumucation.
We realized once we left the US how little we knew about the rest of the world, and it almost feels like that was by design. Americans just simply aren't taught very much about how the rest of the world works. We're just taught that America is the best and freedom, democracy, all these things are the best, without even really having a full knowledge of what that all means.
America does have world-class universities, and we're very lucky to have gone to very good universities. But higher education is becoming more and more expensive and more out of reach for so many people.
In the US, 18-year-olds aren't even allowed to legally drink, but they're able to take out student loans for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to university. And oftentimes at that age, you don't even know what you want to do with your life, and you're spending all this money on an education that may or may not serve you. Of course, it always helps to have a bachelor's degree, and that will help you to get better jobs, but a lot of people don't even end up working in the field that they studied.
I have a degree in political science. The only thing I learned is I should not have studied political science.
And I studied speech therapy, so it kind of relates to my work in education, but it's not exactly what I studied.
All that said, we want to acknowledge again how lucky we are to be Americans. All of the travel experiences we've had over the past 12 years are because we hold American passports, which allow us to travel very freely to many countries around the world, and many of them visa-free. We are very aware of how privileged we are to have had all the experiences that we've had, and to be able to form the opinions that we hold.
These are just our opinions, and you may or may not agree with them, but if you're an American, you might be able to relate to a lot of these things that we've said.
And if you're not an American, maybe you learned a little bit more about America. If you're an American who's ever considered living outside the U.S., you totally can. Leaving the U.S. may not be the right thing for everyone, but it might be the right thing for you. As long as you're doing no harm to others, really you could do whatever the you want.
Honestly, for us, the constant change and growth we experience from travel is addicting, and we can't see stopping anytime soon. And for all of the reasons we mentioned in this video, we have no intentions of moving back to the U.S. Never say never, but as of right now, we definitely don't want to.
Another reminder that travel is not going to solve your problems. Your mind and your mindset follow you wherever you go, so make those a priority. Keep learning, keep growing, treat others with compassion.
Take little steps every day toward your big dreams, and try to enjoy your life in the present as well. We have a digital nomad series here on YouTube with practical information about how to move abroad or start the digital nomad lifestyle. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
Bye-bye.